Welcome to Bits About Books, the home for conversations with authors of breakthrough books on sales, marketing, and business. I am your host, Shubhanjan Sarkar, founder of Pitchling, the next generation buyer-seller engagement platform, where our mission is to make buying easy. Our guest today is Brad David Ball, and we speak with him about his fascinating and very actionable book, The Algebra of Sales and Persuasion.
The core framework is basically the merger of two very popular, two very common frameworks. One is taught in the marketing realm. If you take a marketing class in college, you're going to learn about one of those frameworks. The other is taught more in communication and even debate. And so it's the merger of these two concepts together. And really, the whole algebra of sales is much like when you're doing an algebraic equation, you kind of solve for both sides of the problem. When you're adhering to the algebra of sales, that's the big aspect is adhering to both frameworks and then merging them together.
Over the course of his career, Brad has been to every corner of the world selling technology and competing for multi-million-dollar projects. A B2B sales and marketing expert, he has delivered sales presentations in person in over 80 countries and closed millions of dollars of business on 6 continents. Brad is a senior partner and vice president of sales and marketing at GlobalSim Inc., a technology company that manufactures and sells high-end simulators throughout the world. He is also the founder of Blazer Sales and produces a variety of sales training and leadership material. Brad holds an MBA from Brigham Young University and an executive certificate from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. When not traveling, Brad enjoys boating and skiing with his family, along with hiking, pickleball, classic rock, and 80s music. Brad also enjoys creating and producing travel content on YouTube. Now, on to this insightful session with Brad David Ball. Brad, welcome to Bits About Books. I have not spoken to an author this late into their night. My night sometimes, but not their night. So thank you. Thank you for making time. I appreciate that.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, I wondered about what made you call the book The Algebra of Sales and Persuasion. Let's start there.
Okay. Well, it's quite simple. The concepts in the book, I talk about a lot of things in the book, but the core framework is basically the merger of two very popular, two very common frameworks. One is taught in the marketing realm. If you take a marketing class in college, you're going to learn about one of those frameworks. The other is taught more in communication and even debate. And so it's the merger of these two concepts together. And really, the whole algebra of sales is much like when you're doing an algebraic equation, you kind of solve for both sides of the problem. When you're adhering to the algebra of sales, that's the big aspect is adhering to both frameworks and then merging them together. So it really makes sense if you kind of take that and take that the core concept and framework of the book and put it together. It makes a lot of sense. The algebra of sales and persuasion. So that was the genesis behind the naming of the book, so to speak. But to be fair, the book goes into a lot of other aspects of sales and presentations that are a little bit outside of the combination of those frameworks. So there you have it.
Yeah, right. And these two sides of the equation, are we talking of one side where the vendor or the seller is and the other side the buyer, or is it something else?
Well, if you want, I'm happy to just kind of briefly describe both. So in one sense, the first side of the equation, or the first framework, is a simple buyer's journey. Now, this is a very common concept in marketing and sales. In fact, I think, it was a Gartner who published a big spaghetti diagram, and you have this concept of the buyer's journey that's been around for a long, long time. The AIDA, and, you get a lot of that. I simplify that into basically three parts. I call it the buyer's journey arc. And that's an acronym, ARC, an acronym for awareness, research, and choice. And I define specifically each section there. Now, anybody who's, jumped into this or who's studied this is going to tell you, oh, that's a very simplified buyer's journey. But that's kind of what the book is about. It's very much a fundamentals. It's designed for a lot of times small businesses. I spent a lot of my career in small businesses, and it's amazing that there's a lack of simple sales education. A lot of times people are learning obscure or outdated closing techniques that just don't work. This is a very simple concept. Learning the buyer's journey, awareness, research, and choice, that is a very key component. That's the first side of the equation. The other side of the equation, again, is taught in disciplines that are not affiliated with sales and marketing. Usually it's taught in sometimes communication or humanities courses, and a lot of times in debate. And this is very simple. It's straight from Aristotle. It's ethos, logos, pathos, which has been around for 2 millennia. Very, very common, very easy to understand that. And you can learn it in 5 minutes. Ethos, of course, meaning credibility. Logos, meaning logic or, evidence. And pathos, of course, meaning emotion or passion. And so really the merger of these two, and the algebra, comes when you match the buyer's journey side with the Aristotle's ethos, logos, pathos. And they fit together quite well. Of course, early in a sales process, when you're in the awareness phase of the buyer's journey, you as a seller need to establish credibility. You need to go after that ethos. And if you don't, if you're trying to have an emotional sales pitch with somebody in an awareness phase, you're going to turn them off. You're going to come across as salesy. Of course, you move up into research. When somebody is in a research mode in their buyer's journey, you need to match that with logos. You need to provide evidence, logic, statistics, analysis. They're in that mode. And finally, when you finally get up to the choice phase of the buyer's journey, you need to match that with pathos. That's the time where you can use emotion to sell, to help close a deal or bring a deal to fruition. So again, matching these two together. And I go through many examples in the book, some examples where I screwed it up. And it works well if you learn the situations and the techniques of how to match these together. It's a very simple approach, but a lot of times I think a lot of different frameworks, a lot of different sales methodologies can use a little simplicity. And the best thing is this approach works well with, other frameworks, other methodologies as a way to kind of clear the palette and look at things holistically of, okay, where is somebody at in the buyer's journey and what are our techniques and tactics that we're using right now to help move them along in the sales process. So I hope that was simple and clear enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will revisit this because I have questions, but I don't want to delve into that right now. We will go back to the book. We just got past the title. So obviously, Brad, I mean, you have been looking at the sales function across multiple geographies.
Yes.
And I'm sure you have encountered similar scenarios in multiple geographies and very localized scenarios and so on and so forth. What was your process of writing? Was this something which was happening over years, or was it something that you decided one day, okay, I think it's time to encapsulate all that I've learned into a book. So how did this come about?
Well, I've been keeping notes for really my whole career on some level. And my career, it has kind of an interesting trajectory. Early on, as a teenager, I started my career selling shoes, and I was a top shoe salesman early in my career. Of course, that's a very transactional type of sell. And then I had my own business for a number of years, and was obviously involved in selling and business development, bringing in business. And then, of course, I parlayed that to more of a traditional B2B role, doing software sales, and finally into the company I've been with really over the last decade is a high-tech selling simulators is what I do. And these are big machines that are generally cost $500,000 to $1 million US. And that part has taken me all over the world. I've been to 90 different countries. And so I've kept notes all along. But like many people, it was during COVID when everything had slowed down. And it's like, you know what? I'm going to take this and compile a couple of these frameworks that I've learned along the way and put them into, kind of one document, which ultimately became the book. So.
And so what I hear is that it was during COVID that you actually sort of put them together, and you structured it. So what was your process like? I mean, you had these notes in paper form, some in the phone, some in your computer. What did you do really in the beginning? So
Well, yeah, there was certainly a compilation, and originally I thought I was going to create more of a course. In fact, I did create an initial course, and so the content I was writing down was kind of designed to be delivered in video format. And I had all this content and put some of it out there, and some of it is still on YouTube, quite frankly. But what happened is after COVID, of course, we got back to normal, but I kind of felt like, there's really an opportunity here to put this into a book, and largely for myself, having a published guide that I could use for training, that I could, I've hired a lot in my career, and I wanted something that I could literally day one when I get somebody in say, hey, listen, we're going to learn the concepts in this book, take this home and start to read it. And we're going to train over the next couple of weeks using the frameworks, the theories, and the methods inside the book. So that's how it kind of came about. And taking it from that initial compilation that I did during COVID, and then used for some videos, taking that and putting it into more of a written book form that reads well was a challenge. I spent a better part of a year doing that, even though I had all the content, getting that narrative, figuring out the order of things, and finalizing it. It seems like the last 20% took 6 months. And that might be just me, and that I had a day job and I couldn't, dial in and focus on it. But it did take a while to really polish this over. And I found that sometimes that's life. You can get 60, 70% of something done pretty quick, but then sometimes that last 20, 30% is really what takes a lot of time to polish and to get it right.
right. So who are your early feedback providers? I mean, I'm sure you would have shared as you started writing, you'd have got inputs from friends and colleagues in the past. So who were helping you with actually structuring it into the way it finally came out?
I had a lot of input. My sales career has been a little interesting in that I went all the way with education. I got 2 bachelor's degrees while working. I got an MBA along the way, all while running my own business. And then I've even got an executive certificate. And so along the way, I've made a lot of good connections, and I've kept in touch with a couple of professors. And one professor, when I was getting close with the book, I said, hey, let's help me dial this in, make sure I've got a couple of these things right. That was some very good feedback that he gave me. And a couple of my colleagues in business school and even, even at my company also gave insights and provided some good feedback for me, which I think you need. I think if you're going to write a book and be serious about it, and I'll tell you another thing, as I was coming out with this and compiling it, AI started to take off. And I made a real cognizant decision early on that I wasn't even going to touch that. I kind of feel that that would have kind of spoiled it. I had this, it's like I was, baking a cake or something, and I had the recipe so close. And then this new novel technique came out that also baked cakes, but I decided I didn't want to touch that. I kept it completely free of AI. And I think that it was hard to get across the finish line, but I think it paid off. And I think the book offers some great insights. It's got some great reviews online, and it stands up by itself. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. This is a good segue to dive into the book itself. So let's get back to the buyer's journey.
Yeah.
While I pretty much see your point that if you focus on this 3-step process, which is awareness, research, and choice, I don't know whether you're familiar with Sharon Drew Morgan, and she has been talking about buyer facilitation, right? So
Sure.
as a process, and she talks about just like Gartner spoke about the spaghetti bowl,
Yeah.
which I erroneously referred as noodle bowl and something like that.
Sure.
She talks about a 13-step process, right? And the awareness piece, according to that thought process and that scenario, starts even before awareness, the awareness of the problem internally, somebody noticing that there is something which is not right and that needs fixing, right? So when you talk of awareness, is it that awareness you're talking of, or is it about awareness about potential solutions, or where is the awareness that you mapped into your process starting?
You bring up an excellent point, and you're exactly correct. I mean, and I have, a marketing background and certainly a lot of marketing colleagues and friends and we talk about, problem aware and then solution aware, and you can dive into that for this book. And what I've done here is I've made a real delineation point of, I've not gone in and defined all of the steps of awareness. I've simply given kind of a graphical representation that it starts at the bottom where it's big and wide, and that arc kind of goes up and becomes much more narrow. And the delineation point I suggest in the book, and I not suggest, but I specifically preach about in the book, is where does awareness turn into research? And the point I bring up is when it turns to that when the customer says it does, and you can ask them. And so in other words, if you ask a customer, hey, are you looking for this right now? Almost always, if they're in the awareness phase, they're going to tell you, oh, I'm not in the market. I may know about that, but no, I'm not in the market. Whereas if they're in the research phase, they're rarely going to deny that. If you ask them, hey, are you in the market for this? They're going to tell you, oh, yes, we're researching this right now. We're looking at this option. So that's kind of the delineation point that I make. And of course, again, you could take a scholarly look and do a lot of research and suss out the various different aspects of awareness. Clearly, there's completely unaware, and there's potential clients that are very aware, but are they in the market? Are they looking? That's the delineation point that I make.
I have a follow-up question, just to understand. See, my reading of this process is that the moment you are at the research phase, it is likely that this potential customer is also talking to all my competitors because they're in the research phase, right? So my question is that if I know that I have for instance, you sell a simulator,
Yes.
you pretty much know you pretty much know that these are the ports or these are the people who are likely to buy this simulator, right? That universe can be mapped.
Yes.
Would you want to talk to them when they're in the research phase, or would you rather, it's a question to you, and just to understand the framework, would you rather be in contact with them even earlier, maybe not talking about the simulator but maybe educating them about something else, it doesn't matter, whatever that is, so that they are sort of remembering you as the first port of call when they begin the research, so that you have a seat at the table earlier than your competitors? Just to understand where you stand on that.
100% I am. You want to establish yourself as early in the sales cycle as you can. And, what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, it's going to depend based on the industry you're in. I can tell you in the two or three industries that I've been in my career, selling a expensive simulator to a training organization oftentimes takes me 2 or 3 years. And if I wait until they're already in research mode, I'm way behind. I probably lost to a competitor already. I need to establish myself very early on. And oftentimes what that looks like in my industry is it means, showing up to various different conferences and making in-person visits. That again, I mentioned I've been to 90 different countries. A lot of that is that I'm in Italy or India, or I will usually make some calls to various different organizations that I know train, that I know potentially could use simulators, and at least establish a relationship early on, knowing that it might not pay off for 4, 5, 6 years. In fact, I recently sold a simulator to Vietnam. Actually, it's been a couple years they've had it now, but I started that process in 2016 and it finally closed in 2023. It was 7 years. But all along, I developed a relationship. It took 2 or 3 visits. It took visiting them and participating in conferences. And then, you know what? Finally, they got into the research mode, and by then I was in the lead, and it was just a matter of guiding it to the choice phase. And that's one other aspect is an RFP or a tender. Usually, that comes out at the very end of the research phase, and if you're waiting for an RFP, you've already lost in a lot of businesses. Maybe that's not the case in more transactional selling, but certainly in my line of work, if I get a blind RFP and I've never heard of this company or I've never heard of this project, a lot of times we won't even compete because we know it's set for somebody else. The tender has already been written for somebody else, and it's not worth the time. So,
Yeah, and that's I believe called column fodder.
yeah.
So you become column fodder. You are just like, okay, this guy's
That's
also
exactly
went to,
right.
and they've also. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'm glad you clarified this, because a lot of times, see, like you rightly say, that if it is a transactional thing and decisions can be made quickly, the value is not very high, which means the cost of error is very low. That can happen at the research or maybe even the later stage, because for those, no RFP is going to come out anyway, so you really are doing that, that's fine. But for anything which is substantial, whether it is software or hardware software, whatever that is, I think, like you rightly said, building the relationship, mapping your customer base, and engaging with them very early is key. one, I mean, I like your representation of the arc. I mean, it's really nice, and it's simple. I think that's what I got out of it. That it's a very simple visual which tells you where the activity is more and where it is going towards the point of decision. I think that came out very nicely. I wanted to mention that as we were speaking. The other interesting thing that I want to ask, and this because I read your introduction, and you also mentioned now, is that you talk about concepts which are adjacent to the sales function. You mentioned about debates, you mentioned about marketing, you mentioned about
Right, right.
few other things. So elaborate a bit on that before we actually hit the chapters, and that you can take any which way you want. So tell us a bit, because I think that's a very unique take which is not articulated. Honestly, nobody talks about this, that you are doing this. For instance, the art of listening. I mean, most of us sales guys, we are very eager to talk.
Sure, sure.
So listening is one art which literally needs to be taught. So please, I mean, I'm very intrigued about this, and elaborate on your thought on that one.
Well, I think there's a lot of things there, and part of it is the world of sales in general is well, I guess any industry. You can be a doctor, but are you a pediatrician? Are you a dermatologist? Are you an ophthalmologist? Are you just a general surgeon? There's so many different varieties. Lawyers, are you a divorce lawyer? Are you a corporate lawyer? Are you a specific litigator, a personal injury lawyer? And with sales, I think there's so many different types of sales too. And some of that gets a bad reputation. You can be in car sales, or you can be maybe, and I've been in gym sales very early in my career, selling memberships to gyms, and real estate, that's sales. But there's so many different aspects to this, but a lot of times the barrier to entry in sales is quite low. And oftentimes some of the techniques that are trained and taught in those disciplines, especially in more transactional selling, are things that don't work well when you get into more B2B type of selling. And in B2B type selling, I think that more education and more knowledge of adjacent industries is extraordinarily helpful. And I say marketing. Of course, marketing and sales are tied together, but they're not. They're kind of like half brothers. And sometimes in many organizations, they're somewhat competitive in some ways. The marketing team is focused on lead generation, and then that's it. They go back to creating a fancy advertisement or writing copy, and us sales people, we kind of generally sometimes have a bad opinion of marketing. And how many times have you heard, oh, well, you're only in marketing because you can't sell? And there's this kind of brotherly rivalry going on here. But I've found in my career that if I know more about marketing, that's only going to help me in sales. And I've even gone as far to learn some of the disciplines. And that started back in college and when I went to grad school. But I even went so far to learn a little bit of graphic design. I learned Photoshop. And I can't tell you how many times that's helped me in my sales career over the years, being able to, okay, let me take this graphic and rather than wait for the marketing team, I'm just going to do it myself and get it done fast. And same thing with something like SEO or some basic search engine optimization techniques. That's more of a marketing realm. Sales guys usually aren't concerned about that. But again, I think it's important to become at least knowledgeable on some of these things that are adjacent to sales. Presenting, listening, as you mentioned. Some of these tactics that are generally sometimes more in the realm of communication or debate, probably more important to learn than even some of these hokey transactional selling techniques, the Columbo close and, the teddy bear close or what, that's not going to do me any good. What will do me good is learning how to present better, learning, how to enunciate my voice and techniques that really will make a difference. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is so pertinent because there are, I mean, I can actually see it in organizations, right? So there'll be one person who will be capable of doing it, and he will like, oh, I'm the only guy who can do it, so I'm busy, so I can give this to you next Thursday, and so on. And yet, if you know how to use, I mean, Photoshop is still, I mean, I think higher order. I mean, you can just go into Canva and possibly whip
Yeah.
up something without even that knowing that, right? But people don't want to do that, and which I find surprising, and I'm glad that you mentioned this. It's time for a short break. Stay with us. After the break,
One thing that's overlooked in sales in general is speed. Anything that you can do to speed up the process. And as simple as responding back as quick as possible, turning around a proposal even more quickly than you promise, and not having to wait for some graphic designer or to get buy off from somebody else. Anything you can do to speed up the process yourself absolutely makes a difference.
you are listening to a Business Podcast Network original. Podcasting is the fastest growing content marketing opportunity, which is untapped. We can help you craft your audio strategy and help leverage the wide reach and easy streaming capability that the smartphone penetration provides. It is easy, it is powerful and personal. Talk to us to find out how podcasting can help you build your brand and reach out to your targets like never before. Write to us at bpn@bizcast.in. That is bpn@bizcast.in. Business Podcast Network. Podcasts end to end. Welcome back. I'm Shubhanjan Sarkar, your host for Bits About Books and founder of PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. Let's dive right back into the episode where we left it.
One thing that's overlooked in sales in general is speed. Anything that you can do to speed up the process. And as simple as responding back as quick as possible, turning around a proposal even more quickly than you promise, and not having to wait for some graphic designer or to get buy off from somebody else. Anything you can do to speed up the process yourself absolutely makes a difference. Speed wins deals. I won one of the most influential, impactful deals of my career. Oh, I won it for a few different reasons, but after the fact, the head procurement officer, great lady, she kind of pulled me aside months later and says, I appreciate what you did here. And a big factor, Brad, was the fact that I didn't have to wait for you. Your competition took days to answer questions and turn around. Whereas I know that if I called you or if I emailed you, I was going to get something fast. And that made a difference. Again, speed is an underrated factor in a lot of sales deals.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting. I was once speaking to one very senior salesperson in IBM. And I was just asking, I mean, how do you do it? And he says, Shubhanjan, you'll not believe how many times it was just because I showed up. I was the only guy who showed up. People didn't show up. I just showed up. I made that my mantra. I just show up and I get the business. It's
True.
It's something very similar to what you just said.
Yeah. Very, very true in many cases.
I want to quickly ask you one question. I have a lot of friends who have built video tools to be used for sales, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they have varied degrees of success, but the point is, even after the technology has been out for more than, I would say, 7-8 years, people just don't use it.
Yeah.
People who use it like that, they show up,
Yes.
but there's a vast majority of people who just feel uncomfortable saying, oh, I don't want to record a video and send it to my customer. What is it actually? I mean, have you ever thought of things like this?
Well, yes. I mean, this is this is a complete hack that if you're in B2B sales or any sort of sales and not utilizing Loom or Vidyard or even Zoom clips, that's generally
Yeah.
what I use. I mean, it is a game changer. Rather than nobody reads emails that are more than 2 paragraphs. And I mean, I don't know how many times early in my career, I would spend an hour crafting a 17 paragraph long email. And, obviously you learn more as you go on, and being simple and clear became a big mantra of mine. But in the last 7 or 8 years, being able to use these video emails has just been a game changer. If it's something more than 1 or 2 simple things, I create a video and very simply in a 2 or 3 minute video, clearly explain. And, they get that and they open it up. They see my face. They recognize me.
Yeah.
I'm able to clearly explain. And, I do a lot of business outside of the United States. A lot of times it's in English, but somebody is speaking English as a second language. And so there's captions and subtitles. And it's just such a communication tool that is easy to win. And so, I mean, and that's just one. There are other tools as well.
Yes.
But it's just you've got to use many of these tools to your advantage. And same thing with AI. I think that AI, we're still figuring it out in some sense, but there's some really powerful tools in AI that you can use to your advantage in your correspondence. Again, I said earlier, I didn't use any in my book, but as far as some of your correspondence and your back and forth, there's things you can do that are really game changers.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. The second chapter, interestingly, in your book is about persuasion, which in your arc is possibly the last point, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So tell us about what your view has been of persuasion and where you think people are wrongly focused, perhaps.
Well, I think what I talk about in the book, I mean, I touch on a few points, but the key point, and I call it, I think I call it the original sin of selling. And that is too often salespeople get emotional and try to persuade using emotion, whether it be a story or whether it be, kind of turning up the heat a little bit. And if you do that at the wrong time, it's just going to come across as very, very salesy. It's going to be very much a turnoff. And so the original sin of selling is don't be salesy. Don't dial up that emotion. If you want to be persuasive, follow the formula where you're, starting out building credibility. And that, again, matches with the awareness phase of the buyer's journey. People aren't looking. They don't need you to sell them something when they're not looking. And then, of course, they start to look, research. That's when you layer on the logos, the evidence, the stats. You get to somebody who's researching a product, they're thirsty for information. You've got to be able to deliver that. And finally, as they're nearing a decision, and you can usually tell, that's when it's time to, get the stories going, show a powerful testimonial. Or what I also mentioned in the book is a product demo, a powerful product demo. That's what I call emotional skin in the game, where, get them hooked on your product, whether it be a software product, whether it be, even if you're transactional, you can, maybe you're a restaurant, at least, and I've seen this all over the world, there's a food court, and a lot of times you'll have the Chinese place has a little toothpick, and they're giving a free sample away of the orange chicken. And you know what? That works. I mean, you taste that, you get a little taste of something. Wow, you want more of it. And so that's a big part of it, but you got to do it at the right time. You know, if the guy, the Chinese restaurant owner, if he's selling that clear down at the end of the shopping plaza next to the shoe store, that's not the right time, not the right place. It has to be done. All things kind of have to be done in wisdom and order. And again, if you have an emotional and a persuasive bit, you've got to time it right. But that's a key thing.
Absolutely. How you understand where the customer is, what according to you works? Is it by asking, or is it by, like you mentioned about discovery questions and stuff like that?
Sure.
What gives you as a salesperson the ability to understand where in the journey the customer is? But like you said, I mean, if he's in the research, he's likely to come and ask for information. So
Yes.
that's a giveaway, right? Where is it?
Inbound is a giveaway.
So what tells you that now is the time they're actually making the choice, because now they're confident, they know the landscape, they know the topography, they understand what all solutions are available and what suits them most? Would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, all of this comes to questions and your ability as a salesperson to ask the right questions at the right time to facilitate the conversation. You know, one question that I think I like to say it might be the most important question that I like to ask, usually early on in the sales cycle, is, hey, what are you doing right now? What solution are you using right now? And right there, that is a question that is going to facilitate more conversation, and it's going to immediately make you as a salesperson aware of where they're coming from. You know, that's a great predictor of where they might be going. You know, in my case, have they ever had a simulator before? What are they? Oh, they're not using a simulator. They've never had one. Okay, I now have some knowledge here, and I can ask further questions. You know, oh, have you ever considered it? Have you ever seen one? Have you ever been on one? Of course, those are kind of early questions to ask, and we call it discovery in the world of sales. And there's been many books written on discovery, and you know, some have kind of become sales religion. I mean, spin selling is all about questions, you know, and the needs payoff, and that stuff's all really good. But you learn over time in a sales career what questions are leading up towards a sell. And clearly you start talking about timelines, and you start talking about budgets and terms and conditions. You know, you're getting much, much closer. And right. A lot of times you're competing against various different competitors, different companies along the way, and you've got to kind of navigate that. But, you know, anytime somebody's talking terms and conditions and timelines, you usually know you're on the right track.
Fair enough. There's a lot of the early praise that your book has got talks about the micro stories that you use. Tell us a few, which gives a sense of a flavor, so to say.
Sure. Well, you know, the concept of micro stories is very simple. That I think people overthink stories. There's lots of books written on stories and lots of good books, but people overthink stories and think that you need to have a 5-minute, 10-minute story, or people think of stories. They think of, you know, around a campfire, reading a book. In reality, stories can be 20 or 30-second stories that are very, very fast, that make a succinct point. And it might not even be a story. It might be a very quick analogy but is impactful and really makes a difference. And so, I mean, I tell a story, a micro story in the book. And this is a story where it was a client in Germany. The gentleman reaches out to me, and he has plans already written up for the exact type of simulator he wants to buy. Well, that's kind of not how it works. We have our own product. But rather than offend him or just not play his game, I decided I'd play his game, and I spent a little time with my team, and I got him a proposal for the exact type of system he wanted. And guess what? It was like $3 million. And then I came in and said, you know what? Thomas was his name. I says, Thomas, if you want, I've got a simulator that does 80 to 90% of what your $3 million simulator will do. And it's only $700,000. And he said, really? And of course, it took a few months, but we closed the deal with him. And he's been a happy customer now for many, many years. So that story, what did it take? Maybe 30, 45 seconds for me to tell? Now, I can tell that story and take 5 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes. I could expand that out. And that's a key thing about stories. Micro stories, you should be able to expand them out or shrink them down. I mean, so here's that story in 20 seconds. I had this guy in Germany. He had these plans for a simulator, these crazy plans. And so I gave him a price for it. And that price was $3 million. But then I said, you know what? We've got another solution that's only $700,000. Guess which one he chose? Again, now you've heard the 45-second version, and you've heard the 20-second version. Depending upon the moment, depending upon the situation, the presentation, the time that you have, your audience, you should be able to have these core stories as part of your presentation and be able to expand on them if necessary, or shrink them down so they're very concise. And your ability to do that will really help you. So I say, don't overthink stories. Have a few of them in your back pocket and be able to expand and contract them as necessary.
This is so true because, most of the stories that we hear today, Aesop's fables for one, they're really short stories. I mean, it takes a minute or less, and it has endured 1,000 years. So I guess your point is well taken.
Yeah, absolutely. And nothing against a good long story, but I'll tell you what, most of the time in a sales situation, you're not going to be telling a 4 or 5 minute story. You're not even going to be telling a 2 or 3 minute story. It's going to be a very quick and concise point you're trying to make.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll get to the end. However, you're free to, choose some more sections that you want to talk about. I wanted to ask about this get versus go framework because it sounds very interesting. And tell us a bit about that.
Well, it's a unique way that I've found to manage a pipeline. And it's not the only way, but I've found that it works quite well with our approach where we have these long sales cycles where we're in a very niche industry. And what it is you take a deal, and rather than focus like most CRMs would have you do, focus on a closing date, what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to say in the next 90 days, what is the likelihood that this deal, that the company that is the prospective buyer is going to make a decision? That is the go score. Okay. And so if it's something that, hey, but they've been talking about budget all along and things are getting close, that this feels like it could close in 90 days, your go score is going to be quite high. It might be 70, 80. As you get closer, it's going to, the percentage chance that it's going to close is getting higher and higher. Likewise, you ask the same question about what are the chances that they choose us versus a competitor. And so let me give you a couple of examples here. So you end up with 2 scores here, but right now, literally this week, I'm working with a client that is here in the United States. they have one of our existing products. They have an existing simulator. And there is about a 95% chance that they're going to select us. They really don't have any other options. It would be hard for them to choose somebody else. They're all trained on our stuff. They know our stuff. The changing costs would be too high. So their get score is like 90. However, on the other end of the spectrum, their go score is quite low because they've indicated that, we don't have the budget yet. We're very close, but not that close. It's probably going to be 6 months to a year. They're very fuzzy about that go score. So what we do is we combine those together. In this case, they got a 90 on their get score, but they've got only about a 40 on their go score. So we combine those together and multiply it by 100. And so basically 9 times 4, 36. We've got them as a 36 in our pipeline. And that's how we manage it accordingly with these projects that sometimes drag on for many, many months. And I'll ask my team, I'll say, okay, you've got this in the pipeline. Let's see where you're at. What's their get score? Oh, their get score is only about 50%. Oh, why? Well, they're choosing between us and a competitor. They don't know. Okay. What's their go score? Well, their go score is 90. They're going to make a decision regardless in 3 weeks. So again, balancing these two out and provides some clarity to the pipeline and also helps us make decisions, based on what we need to focus on. So I hope that was clear.
Absolutely. And I think that also very clearly dictates what your role has to be. Because some of these things where the go score is low, you potentially have to stay engaged. You have to have a plan. You cannot show up after 6 months expecting things might have changed, people might have changed, and so on and so forth, right? So
that's exactly right.
I totally see that.
And if the get score is low, that means you're facing competition, and you've got to shore up, your value proposition compared to the competition. And so that's again, it's a yin and yang there, two sides to this, but it works. And I've heard from others who've incorporated this, because I've kind of been preaching this for over a decade. And I've heard from others who've really liked this approach. And oftentimes they don't fully adopt it, but they use it as a good way to flush out their pipeline during a sales meeting. It asks some hard questions if you assign a get and a go score.
This is an interesting time to ask this question, which I've been meaning to discuss multiple times. Do you think that the CRM, the tool CRM, is now actually outdated in the way it has been planned? And because the largest players in the system have so much of legacy riding on their code, that they're not able to really step out and build something which is really what it should be?
That's a really interesting question there. And I would tend to think, first of all, again, depends on your industry. If you're in a transactional or even a somewhat transactional type of selling situation, you may really need to dial into your CRM and marry yourself to it. But I do think that we have a situation where Salesforce.com and a few of these legacy players now have archaic systems. In fact, this is kind of funny, but one of the brightest tech guys I know, I was out to lunch with him one day and I said, is there any technology that, you know how to code, all this technology. Is there any product or program or technology that you don't like dealing with? He says, yeah. Salesforce.com, all of the configuration and it's just a headache. And I'm like, really? As bright a guy as he is, that he didn't like dealing with it. And I think there's a lot of technology that's like that. Another example is the WordPress. WordPress, of course, 20 years ago was really exciting, but that infrastructure has kind of gotten a little clunky. And now you have Wix and these other solutions out there that are a little more streamlined. And so it is an interesting kind of technological thing that we're dealing with with CRMs is you do kind of got to keep them up to date, and maybe even look at migrating to something that is more efficient and more suitable for the technology that we live in today.
The interesting thing that I keep telling people is that in the CRM, the R is completely missing right now. There's no relationship there. You're really tracking something, but whatever you are tracking, it's not relationship. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's true. Very true.
Anything else you think you want to talk about?
I guess the one last thing, I did do some real research in the book. I conducted a survey, led a survey, and that talked specifically about the factors that lead to credibility. And I thought that was an interesting chapter because there were some interesting takeaways there. And some of this stuff is kind of common knowledge, which is obviously competency and reliability. According to the survey that I did, those were clearly the highest. But then it got a little bit interesting. And one factor that I found interesting in the research, and it's in the book, I forget the chapter, I think it's chapter 5, but likability. In the last decade or so, likability has become kind of a controversial subject in the world of B2B sales. And I think that stems from the challenger sell. Now, I love the challenger sell. I was enlightened the first time I read it, and it was kind of a game changer for a lot of things. But I believe one of the misinterpretations of the challenger sell is that likability and relationships no longer matter. Now, I don't think challenger sell taught that, but I think that's how some people interpret it. That the relationships, you don't need relationships. You need to, provide value and take control. What is it called? Tweak, tailor, and take control, I think. That preaches in that book. And again, I've even talked to a couple people that were involved in the original research of the challenger sell, and they kind of agreed with me that, people misinterpret that. And even to this day, you go online and you talk about, is likability important in sales? And you're going to get a wide variety of opinions. No, it doesn't matter that much. And the research that I did for the book indicated that after competency and reliability, that likability was really next in line. It's still quite important. And yes, relationships are not the same as they used to be, but you still got to be kind of likable and friendly if you're going to have success. And I'll double down on that and say that in my experience traveling, not just domestically in the United States, but selling all over the world, you've got to be likable. People have got to enjoy doing business with you. The old mantra, people buy from who they know, like, and trust, still rings true. And likability is still important. So that's kind of a takeaway that I had in that chapter.
This is wonderful, and this is a great note to end this conversation. But I hope that we will continue to chat and continue to exchange thoughts. Brad, thank you so much for your time and all the interesting things that you shared with our listeners.
Bits About Books is brought to you by PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. PitchLink makes buying easy by enabling high-quality engagement between buyers and sellers through its presentation and discussion modules. Sellers create customized sales narratives using sales collaterals and personal videos, and reach out to prospects through a non-intrusive, buyer-qualified engagement. PitchLink requires no installation or download and holds the entire repository of sales collaterals and buyer-seller conversations. Talk to us to know more about how you can engage with customers without intrusion. Call us on 99021 631 32.
Shobha John, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to to be here chatting with you, and I enjoy the bits about books. I've listened to a few, and I'll look forward to this one and others in the future.
Thank you. We have a great lineup of authors like Charles Green, Enrico Gallorini, and Ramli John over the next few episodes with insightful conversations on breakthrough books on sales, marketing, business, and events. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you do not miss a single episode. Thanks for listening. Thank you for being with us today on Bits About Books, where we talk to authors about breakthrough books on sales, marketing, and business. We hope this conversation helped inform and motivate as we all navigate a rapidly changing business environment. For us, these are enlightening conversations enriched with knowledge and expertise. We encourage you to go out and buy the book to learn firsthand and implement some of the great ideas we discussed today. We hope to have you with us again in the next exciting episode of Bits About Books. If you liked what you heard, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast from, and give us a rating while you are at it.
This Bizcast original podcast is produced for PitchLink, the next generation buyer-seller engagement platform, where the mission is to make buying easy. Hosted by Subhanjan Sarkar and produced by Rajiv Aditya. See you next time and have a wonderful day.